Hello guys, how are you today? This is your teacher Donald again. Today we're going to explain or introduce a little bit elements of a story. That's a reading strategy that we are going to see during this trimester. This is our first strategy. Today is Thursday, March 18, 2020, 21, I mean. Okay guys, elements of a story. It's very important to get familiar with the elements of a story in order to understand every element, and that will help us to understand better the story. Okay, the objective of this class is a review a story structure, or in this case we're going to identify and define elements of a short story. The characters and characterization. The characters are people who act in the story, but the people can be people, animal, or creature, or even superheroes. The description of the personality of the characters in the story and the way in which an author reveals their personalities. Okay, the author has the responsibility to describe the characters. So sometimes the same author is one of the characters of the story. And the characters can be primary and secondary. Also, we have the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonists are the good guys and the antagonists are the bad guys. Let's see here a little bit more clear elements of a story. We have setting, characters, plot, conflict. We don't have the theme, but we are going to include theme and resolution. And the plot. Setting. The setting is where the story takes place, but it's going to refer to the time and the place. Remember, for time, when; for place, where. Okay, it's very important. Every single story have a setting, and sometimes you are going to find more than one setting, depend on the content of the story. Then we have the characters, as I mentioned before, are people, animal, or creature in a story. And the plot are the series of events or the sequence of events that make up a story, or how the story is organized. So the conflict is a problem or struggle between two people, things, or ideas. Can be concrete things or abstract things. The setting, let's see each one of them individually. The setting describes where and when the story takes place. That's what I explained you before in the previous slide. And also it helps us to build background and create images in the mind. To picture in your mind any content that the author reveals in the story. Also, it helps set the tone or mood of the story. The mood, remember, the emotional state. The detail that can be described, that the setting can describe, are time of day, time of year. That's why the question when. Time in history, scenario, which is the place, weather, and location. Here we have two pictures, two examples about settings. And here we have the time. Huh? Okay, also the author is going to help us, or is going to include some description of the setting through the 5 senses. Is going to put the sight, the smell, the taste, the feel, and the sound. Every story needs characters. A story without characters is not a story. Okay, so the character is very important. So we can have, as I told you, people in the story as characters, animals, or even creatures. The protagonist is the good guy. Here we have strong examples you are familiar with, like Superman, Indiana Jones, Shrek, Harry Potter, and Edward. So they are some of the good characters, you know. The antagonist is the opposite. Is the bad guy, you know, the bad person acting in the story. It can be animals like this dinosaur from Jurassic Park and Star Wars. Look at here. you have seen all of these movies, right? So you have an idea what I'm talking about antagonists, bad people, bad guys. The plot is really important in the story. Without a plot, the story doesn't make sense because the plot is like the structure of the story. So the plot is the chain of related events that take place in a story. It's like change of event. It's a, remember, it's a sequence of events, and it helps us to understand the story better, much better. Build around conflict, which is the struggle between opposing forces. Okay, here we have a structure, a little diagram in where you can see that the author starts with the exposition. The author is going to introduce the story, maybe describing the character or introducing a situation. Then the rising action is going to lead you to the climax. The climax is the middle point of the story, is the highest point of the story. That's why in the story, I will be asking you what happened at the beginning, what happened at the middle, or what happened at the end of the story. Once you identify the climax of the story, the highest points of the story, is when the story is going to lie you more. Then it's going to be in falling action. There's going to be the falling action, and then it's going to be connected with the end or the solution for that conflict. And also, it's called like the conclusion, the final conclusion of the story. And you can also get a message from this story, moral value or moral message. It depends on the content of the story. The plot is the events that take place in a story. Every story needs a plot. The plot has different parts. Let's see how many parts and what are their function in the story. On the plot components. The plot components, we have climax. But first, let's read the exposition. The author, it will be introducing or exposing the story at the beginning, the start of the story before the action starts. This is previous to the action. No? Then we have the rising action, is the series of events and conflict in the story that lead us to the climax. Look at here, it's rising action. Then once we are here, we are going to get the climax. The turning point or the most intense moment, either mentally or in action. It's gonna be the highest point of the story. Then once we identify the climax, we're gonna have the following action, all of the action which follows the climax. And then finally, we're going to get a conclusion or a resolution to solve the conflict. So that will be our conclusion, the tying together of all the threads. As you saw, the climax is the most exciting part of the story. I really like when I find the climax, because the story looks more interesting, and I want to continue reading. You know, I'm pretty sure you too. The conflict is gonna be like a confrontation. It's like a battle. It's a battle between two forces. Okay, here look at the picture. They are having a battle to be who is the strongest one, right? So the conflict isn't always bad. Sometimes it helps to create change. Sometimes the conflict is going to help us to create some changes in the story. The conflict is the struggle between two forces in the story. That's what saw previously. And without conflict, there is no plot. Look at here. We have different confrontation, animals and people. Types of conflict. Sometimes the character is going to have conflict with other characters. Character versus the nature, with the nature. Maybe there is a hurricane, there is a, I don't know, a disaster in the nature that affect the characters. The character versus society. A lot of people, and there is a problem with the character and people around it, around him or her. No? And finally, the character versus self. The character sometimes is going to have a internal conflict, and then he or she is going to project that in the story. Who's going to show that in the story. Okay, guys, I hope you like this class or this explanation, this short explanation, brief explanation. And remember that for next class, we are going to review a little bit all the material we have given during this week. And next week, don't forget the homework by Tuesday, the homework in where you have to complete the template using the vocabulary, where our vocabulary number 1, remember, comfort, mention properly those words.